What if your enemy's most devastating, most terrifying weapon, the one thing that seemed truly invincible, fell right into your lap by pure, dumb luck? What if one pilot, lost in the clouds, made a single catastrophic error that handed you the keys to victory? This is that story. The sky over the English Channel in early 1942 was a realm of ghosts and hunters. 4 Allied pilots, one ghost haunted them above all others, the Focke-Wulf 190. It appeared in the autumn of 1941, a phantom emerging from the sun, and from its very first encounter, it rewrote the rules of aerial combat. It was a killer. The British nicknamed it the Butcher Bird, a name spoken with a mixture of professional respect and raw fear in the smoky briefing rooms of RAF fighter stations. It was faster than their beloved Spitfire Mark V. It could outclimb it, outdive it, and most unnervingly, it could outroll it with a shocking, almost instantaneous agility. A Spitfire pilot chasing a 190 would watch in disbelief as the German fighter snapped into a roll, reversed direction, and flashed past in the opposite direction, cannons blazing, before the Spitfire could even begin to follow. The statistics were a blood-red tide, washing over RAF fighter command. Losses soared. Veteran pilots, men who had stared down the Messerschmitt 109s during the Battle of Britain and won, were now being swatted from the sky. Squadron leader J.E. Johnny Johnson, who would go on to become Britain's top-scoring ace, captured the feeling of helplessness perfectly. For the first time in the war, he wrote, his words heavy with the memory of lost friends, "Our fighters were comprehensively outclassed." The FW-190 didn't just carry machine guns. It carried 4 20mm cannons that spat explosive shells, turning Allied fighters into clouds of confetti with a single, brutal burst. The warnings spread like a virus through the Allied air forces. As American pilots of the U.S. Army Air Forces arrived in England with their powerful but heavy P-47 Thunderbolts, they were given a grim catechism of survival. Do not try to outturn the 190. Do not follow it into a dive. It will leave you standing still. Do not, under any circumstances, engage it in a rolling scissors fight. You will lose. The list of what not to do was long and terrifying. The list of what would work was dangerously, heartbreakingly short. Allied intelligence was in a state of desperate urgency. What was the secret to this machine? What sorcery had its designer, Kurt Tank, woven into its airframe? What were its hidden weaknesses, its Achilles' heel? Every FW-190 shot down over Britain was a wreck, a twisted pile of metal that guarded its secrets in death. They needed one intact. They needed a Rosetta Stone to decipher this deadly new language of the sky. And then, on a cloudy June day, a German pilot made a simple, fatal mistake and delivered that Rosetta Stone right to their doorstep. He wasn't just any pilot. He was Oberleutnant Armin Faber, and his error was about to change the course of the air war. Oberleutnant Armin Faber was no green novice. At just 21 years of age, he was already an accomplished *experte, a seasoned fighter ace with multiple victories painted on the rudder of his aircraft. He was a proud member of Jagdgeschwader II, the legendary Richthofen Wing, an elite unit that carried the legacy of the Red Baron himself. On the 23rd of June 1942, the air was thick with the scent of salt and exhaust as his squadron took off from a forward base in Brittany. Their mission, a Freyjagd, a fighter sweep over the English Channel, providing top cover for German bombers raiding coastal installations. The sky was a chaotic canvas of blue and churning white clouds. The initial part of the mission was textbook. But on the return leg, combat was joined. A squadron of Spitfires rose to meet them, and the sky dissolved into a dizzying, three-dimensional ballet of death. Faber, flying his Focke-Wulf 190A3, Werk number 313, engaged a Spitfire, his body straining against the crushing G-forces as he twisted and turned, chasing the elusive British fighter through the cloud banks. In the visceral, disorienting chaos of a dogfight, a pilot's world shrinks to the view through his windscreen and the feel of the controls in his hands. Time and direction become fluid. Faber, in a moment of aggressive maneuvering, executed a perfect 180-degree turn, but in the heat of the moment, with his senses screaming and the sun glinting off the clouds at a confusing angle, he failed to register it. He believed he was still heading south, back towards France. When he finally broke free from the engagement, his wingman lost in the melee, he saw a coastline emerge through a break in the clouds. Below him lay a green patchwork countryside and, blessedly, an airfield. His fuel was running low, his ammunition spent. Relief washed over him. His fatigued mind, conditioned by months of operations, made a simple, logical, and utterly catastrophic assumption. He was over occupied France, looking at a friendly Luftwaffe base. In reality, the Bristol Channel had tricked him. He was over South Wales, and the airfield below was Royal Air Force Pembrey. The mistake seems almost impossible in hindsight, a blunder of comical proportions. But combat disorientation, spatial D as pilots called it, was a terrifyingly common and often fatal phenomenon. Faber, a victor in his recent duel, performed a confident victory roll over the field, a flourish for the ground crews he believed were watching. He lowered his landing gear, lined up with the grass runway, and brought the world's most advanced fighter to a gentle, perfect landing. He taxied towards the control tower, the roar of the magnificent BMW 801 radial engine dying down to a ticking silence. He slid back the canopy, the cool, damp Welsh air hitting his face. He pulled off his leather helmet, ran a hand through his sweat-soaked hair, and looked around. And in that one, heart-stopping second, his world fractured. The aircraft parked on the flight line weren't Messerschmitts, they were Spitfires. The men running towards him weren't wearing the familiar field gray of the Luftwaffe, they were in the deep blue of the Royal Air Force. The blood in Armin Faber's veins turned to ice. The initial reaction among the RAF personnel at Pembrey was sheer, dumbfounded confusion. A German fighter, the very symbol of their current struggle, had just landed as if arriving for a social visit. For a frantic moment, Faber, realizing his monumental blunder, tried to restart his engine. The prop coughed, but it was too late. An alert RAF officer, Group Captain David Roberts, had jumped onto the wing of the Focke-Wulf and pointed a flare pistol at the German pilot's head. It was over. Within minutes, a stunned but compliant Armin Faber was in custody, and British intelligence officers were staring at a pristine, fully operational Focke-Wulf 190A3, the Luftwaffe's crown jewel, sitting on their grass. The news shot through the RAF command structure like a bolt of lightning. At the headquarters of RAF Fighter Command, the atmosphere was not just relief, it bordered on giddy euphoria. Air Chief Marshal Sir Sholto Douglas, a man burdened by the daily casualty reports, is said to have seen the initial telex report and exclaimed, "We've got one! By God, we've finally got one!" He immediately gave the order. The aircraft was to be transported to the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough under the tightest possible security. It was a state secret of the highest order. Within 48 hours, the FW-190, draped in canvas and guarded by armed men, was carefully trucked to the top-secret facility where Britain's finest aviation engineers and test pilots awaited. What they uncovered in the weeks that followed would not only explain the Butcherbird's dominance, but provide the very blueprint for its defeat. The aircraft was a revelation, a masterpiece of ruthless, practical engineering, where the Spitfire was an artist's creation of elegant, elliptical lines and aerodynamic grace, a rapier. The FW-190 was a blacksmith's tool of war, a perfectly balanced warhammer. The heart of the beast was its BMW 801 twin-row 14-cylinder radial engine. It was a marvel of compact power, producing a staggering 700 horsepower, a significant jump over the Spitfire V's Rolls-Royce Merlin, which topped out around 470. But raw power was only part of the story. The German engineers had designed an ingenious engine command unit, the Kommandogerät, a mechanical computer that automated engine management, freeing the pilot to focus solely on flying and fighting. The Spitfire pilot had to manage throttle, propeller pitch, and mixture settings manually. The FW-190 pilot just had to move a single lever. But its most revolutionary and devastating advantage was something more subtle: its roll rate. The aircraft could snap from a hard left bank to a hard right bank in the blink of an eye, a speed that left Allied fighters feeling as if they were wallowing in mud. This wasn't just a flashy aerobatic trick. It was a fundamental combat game-changer. It could dance a jig while the Spitfire was still learning the waltz. Britain's legendary test pilot, Captain Eric Winkle-Brown, was one of the first to fly the captured machine. Climbing into the cockpit, he was struck by the superb visibility and the logical pilot-focused layout. Then he took off. "The ailerons were light and responsive at all speeds," he reported, his words barely concealing his professional awe. "You could throw this aircraft around the sky with almost no effort." The Spitfire required muscle and finesse. The FW-190 responded to thought. Then there was the firepower. Faber's A3 model carried 2 fuselage-mounted machine guns and, most terrifyingly, 4 20mm MG-151 cannons in the wings. A 2-second burst from this quartet of cannons delivered a greater weight of explosive shells than a Spitfire could in 10 seconds of continuous fire. The guns were clustered, creating a tight, devastating pattern of destruction that could shred an enemy aircraft in an instant. But as the engineers and test pilots at Farnborough pushed Faber's captured prize to its limits, they began to find the chinks in its formidable armor. This was where the intelligence coup turned from a tactical curiosity into strategic gold. The FW-190 was a low to medium altitude god, but its divinity faded in the thin, cold air of the stratosphere. The powerful BMW 801 radial engine, air-cooled and optimized for performance below 20,000 feet, began to struggle dramatically above that altitude. Its performance fell off a cliff. The engine gasped for air, and pilots reported a significant loss of power and persistent overheating issues. The Spitfire, by contrast, with its liquid-cooled Merlin engine equipped with a 2-stage supercharger, was born for the high-altitude fight. The Merlin didn't just tolerate the thin air, it thrived in it, its performance actually improving as it climbed higher. The heavy weight that made the FW-190 a superb diver also made it less nimble in a prolonged, turning dogfight. It could outroll a Spitfire to gain a momentary advantage, but it couldn't outturn it. If an Allied pilot could survive the initial onslaught and lure the Butcherbird into a sustained horizontal turning battle, the German fighter would bleed energy, and the advantage would slowly but surely shift. The Spitfire could circle tighter and tighter, like a wolf herding its prey. Most critically, the engineers discovered a vulnerability born of its incredible speed. In a steep dive, exceeding 400 miles per hour, the control surfaces of the FW-190 became incredibly heavy. The pilot had to physically fight the controls, using significant strength to pull the aircraft out of the dive. This created a window of vulnerability. An Allied fighter that could hang on through the initial dive, even if it couldn't keep pace, could pounce as the German pilot wrestled with his own machine during the pullout. This was the aha moment. The Rosetta Stone had been deciphered. British intelligence didn't waste a second. Tactical bulletins filled with diagrams, performance charts, and stark new commandments were immediately distributed to every RAF squadron. But they did something even more crucial, something that would magnify the impact of Faber's mistake tenfold. They invited their new, powerful allies to the party. In August 1942, a handful of top American test pilots from the U.S. Army Air Forces were flown to Farnborough under a veil of secrecy. They were there to meet Germany's boogeyman in person. Among them was Major Cass S. Hoff, a pilot whose subsequent report would become one of the most important documents of the air war. After flying the FW-190, Hoff's assessment was blunt, tactical, and devoid of emotion. It was a blueprint for survival and victory. The FW-190 will beat any Allied fighter below 20,000 feet if the German pilot knows what he is doing, he wrote. The words were a sobering confirmation of what pilots already knew. But then came the solution. Our advantage is altitude. Above 25,000 feet, our P-47s and later model Spitfires have the edge. Force them high and we win. Let them dictate the low-altitude combat and we die. This single, stark piece of intelligence fundamentally reshaped American fighter doctrine in Europe before their campaign had even truly begun. When the P-47 Thunderbolt groups began flying missions in force in 1943, they flew by a new Bible. Their doctrine was built around a single concept: high-altitude energy fighting. Bomber escorts were flown not just above the bombers, but as high as their engines could take them, in the thin, cold air above 25,000 feet. Fighter sweeps became hunting expeditions in the stratosphere. When German fighters rose to challenge them, American pilots would often do the opposite of what their instincts screamed. They would climb, using their superior high-altitude performance to lure the gasping FW-190s into an environment where they were weak. The lessons from Faber's captured FW-190 bled into every aspect of Allied air power. Engineers at Wright Field in Ohio and at North American Aviation studied the FW-190's brilliant aileron design and began work to improve the roll rates of the P-47 and the new P-51 Mustang. The bubble canopy, offering superb all-around vision, was another feature of the FW-190 that heavily influenced the design of later Allied fighters, most notably the iconic P-51D Mustang and P-47D Thunderbolt. But perhaps the most profound impact was psychological. The FW-190 was no longer a mythical, invincible monster. It was a known quantity. It was a superb machine, yes, but one with specific, exploitable flaws. Allied pilots, who had been cowed by its reputation, now had a playbook. They had confidence. They knew how to fight it and how to win. By the end of 1943, the tactical landscape had been utterly transformed. New Spitfire Mark IXs, equipped with the powerful Merlin 60 series engines, could now meet the FW-190 on equal or better terms across most altitudes. American P-47s and P-51s, flown by pilots drilled in the new high-altitude doctrine, began to take a fearsome toll on the Luftwaffe. The kill ratios, once so heavily skewed in Germany's favor, began to shift, then tilt, then avalanche in the Allies' favor. German pilots were baffled. Allied fighters were no longer falling for their old tricks. Oberleutnant Joseph Pips Priller, one of Germany's highest-scoring aces, noted the change with frustration in his combat journal. "The Amos, they have clearly studied our machine," he wrote in late 1943. "They no longer follow us into rolling scissors. They stay high, forcing us to climb where our engines labor. They have learned." They had, indeed. Faber's FW-190, given the RAF serial number MP-499, remained at Farnborough for the duration of the war, a living reference library. When the new long-nosed FW-190D9, the Dora, appeared in late 1944 with its powerful inline engine designed specifically to fix the high-altitude problem, Allied intelligence wasn't starting from scratch. They could immediately compare its performance to Faber's original A model, understanding precisely how German designers were attempting to counter the Allied strategy, a strategy born from Faber's own mistake. After the war, aviation historians tried to quantify the impact. The intelligence from that single aircraft was disseminated to thousands of pilots. It influenced doctrine, shaped aircraft design, and informed operational planning for the RAF, the USAAF, and even the Soviet Air Force. Captain Eric Brown, the man who flew more captured aircraft than any other, stated it plainly. Faber's navigation error gave us the Rosetta Stone for understanding German fighter design. Every tactical advantage the FW-190 possessed was documented, and every weakness was exploited. That single aircraft probably saved more Allied lives than any single intelligence coup of the war. The biting irony was not lost on the Germans. A captured Luftwaffe intelligence officer later commented, "We spent months, years, trying to capture an intact Spitfire Mark 9. The British didn't have to try. We delivered our best fighter directly to them, with a full tank of fuel." Armin Faber himself spent the rest of the war in a prisoner-of-war camp in Canada. He returned to Germany after the war and lived a quiet life, passing away in 1976, forever known as the man whose mistake had such monumental consequences. His single navigation error had turned Germany's greatest airborne strength into an open book for its enemies. In the complex, brutal calculus of war, where advantage is measured in blood and steel, one pilot's momentary confusion over the English Channel proved more decisive than 1,000-bomber raid. That is how a simple mistake shifted the balance of power in the skies over Europe, and how the Allies learned to defeat Hitler's most feared fighter.
Dear viewers, thank you for being here. Stay tuned to the channel for tons of exciting videos. Every day we upload fresh stories packed with thrills, suspense, and surprises. Don't miss out. Comment, share, subscribe, and hit that like button. This channel is for you, and the best is yet to come.